What is up, loud teachers and students? Today we are going to talk about the fabulous concept of rounding. This is where we get an approximate answer or we get a near or close answer. This is important because it allows us to make mental math a lot easier, and it really develops a strong sense of number sense within us. If you've talked about rounding before, today we're going to go over different strategies that will hopefully help you visualize what rounding actually means. If you've never talked about rounding before, we're going to go through it step by step so that it's super easy and really awesome for you to learn. Before we get started, we always want to be mindful about our math practice. So take a deep breath in. And I want you to breathe in all of that awesome skill and talent you have, all that number sense, and let go of any doubts you have in yourself. You are going to do awesome. Let's get started. Let's begin with our number talk. This is a way for us to develop that number sense, and so I want you to think not only of what the answer to this problem is, but all the different strategies, all the different methods that you could use to solve this particular question. So some of you might already have a really strong sense of number sense, and so you might be able just to add this in your head and know that this is 90. Some of you might have broken apart 70 plus 9 plus 10 plus 1 and added together 9 plus 1 first with that associative property to get 10, and then 7 tens plus 1 10 is 8 tens, plus another 10 is 9 tens, or 90. Some of you might have thought about this with base 10 blocks. Some of you might have stacked them on top of each other like an algorithm. Whatever method you used, it works out great. I want you to, if you are using the worksheet, to pause this video and make sure you write down really great answers. And our first vocabulary word of the day is rounding. That's what we're talking about this whole lesson. Rounding is finding the approximate value of a number, replacing a number with a shorter or simpler number. I don't care what you plan on doing with your life, you are going to need rounding. For example, if I go shopping at the grocery store and I know that I want to spend about $50, I don't add together all of the items on my shopping list with a calculator. Instead, I walk around the grocery store and I go $1.99, that's about $2. $2.50, that's like $3. So that way I make sure I have enough money when I go to the checkout that I'm staying in budget. So this is a really useful skill. Next vocabulary word is midpoint. This is the exact middle between two numbers. This can help you with rounding. Specifically, the midpoint really helps us visualize what rounding is, and it helps develop our number sense if we think about rounding in terms of its midpoint. Let's go through this first strategy of rounding together. This is the one you're probably familiar with. I like to add drawing in underlines and arrows because for me and my students, that really helps us keep track of where we are, and it also helps me as their teacher see where my students have made a mistake.
Oh no!
So method 1 means looking at the digit. Step 1 in this method is underline the digit that the question is asking you to round to. So in this example, I've underlined the 0 because my 0 is in my tenths place. So this question is asking me to round 8 9/100ths to the nearest tenth. Step 2, draw an arrow to the number to the right. Now, of course, as you get better at rounding, you can skip this step, but this shows you where you're looking at. So if I'm rounding to the tenths place, I'm looking to the hundredths place, the digit that's closest to the right. Step 3, ask yourself if the number is 5 or above, raise it up. 4 or below, stays the same down low. So let's take a look at our example, 8.09 or 8 9/100ths. We underlined the 0 because that's the place we're rounding. We're looking at the 9 because that's the next place to the right. We're asking ourselves, is 9 5 or bigger or 4 and lower? 9 is obviously greater than 5, so our 0, that underlined digit, is going to be pushed up 1. Now let's say instead of a 9 there was a 4. What would happen is our 0 would stay the same and we'd just get rid of the hundredths place. Step 4, The digit that you underline is raised up 1 if the number to the right is 5 and above, and the digit that underlined stays the same if the number to the right is 4 and below.
Yeah.
All other digits to the right are changed to a 0. All digits to the left stay the same. So in this case, like I was explaining at step 3, our hundredths place was a 9, so it moved our 0 up to a 1, and so we're writing out our full answer, which is 8 and 1/10. Now let's head to the whiteboard to learn this very important chant of rounding. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stays the same down low. Again, 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stays the same down low. Now with a puppy. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stays the same down low. She's not happy about either. Now let's do a practice with this particular kind of method. So you see I have 7 and 16/100ths and I'm rounding to the nearest whole. So I'm underlining that 7 because that's the place I'm rounding to. I'm drawing an arrow to the right to look at that 1. That's what I'm going to consider. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 below, stays the same down low. My 1 is 4 and below. So my 7 is going to stay the same. All of my digits to the right are turned to zeros, which don't matter in this particular case. And that's my answer, 7. Now let's do a practice problem, but with the digit 5, because that's right in the middle in the base 10 system. So we're rounding to the nearest whole, so we underline the 3, because that's in the 1 place. We look to the 5. Because 5 is right next to the 3, we say 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stay the same down low. So 5 is 5 and above, so it's going to change that 3 to a 4, so my answer is 74. 7 stays the same because it's to the left, but 5 and 9 disappear because they're to the right of the 1's place. They turn to zeros, which in this case doesn't mean anything. Now let's dive into method number 2, which is midpoint on a number line. For this method, you're probably familiar with it if your school uses a curriculum like Engage New York or Eureka Math. If not, it's still a really great way to visualize how rounding works. What rounding is it's basically finding a number on the number line that's pretty close to what you're talking about. It's finding a number that makes sense between two options. So with that, step 1 of this method is underline the digit that your question is asking you to round to. Underline the tenths, for example, if it's asking you to round to the 10th. Step 2, draw a number line that shows the number you underlined with no other numbers to the right as the smallest possible option, and then raise that underlined digit up to the next number. So in this case, that's kind of confusing, but in this case, it is 8.0 on the left end and 8.1 on the right end. Basically, just like when we were 5 and above, raise it up, 4 and below, stay the same down low, we're debating between these two possible options that the answer could be.
Yeah.
Step 3, find the midpoint on your number line, which is the exact middle of the two numbers. So in this case, I'm asking myself, what's the exact middle between 8.0 and 8.1? I always like to think about money because that's a little bit easier for me. What's the middle of $8 and $8.10? In this case, it would be $8.05 or 8 5/100.
Ooh.
Something to kind of notice is that your midpoint is always going to involve a 5. And that's kind of important too. That's why 5 is our 5 and above for our other method. That's because in base 10, 5 is always going to be the middle between 0 and 10. Step 4, place your original number on that number line. Ask yourself, is my number on the left or the right of that midpoint? Is it closer to the bigger or smaller number? So in this case, I put 8 9/100ths on my number line. You can see that it's in between 8 5/100ths, which was my midpoint, and 8.1, which is my bigger number. So I'm just noticing now that 8 9/100ths is on the right of my midpoint. Step 5, your new rounded number becomes whichever digit it is closer to. So in our example, 8 9/100ths is closer to 8 1/10 than 8. So rounded 8 9/100ths becomes 8 1/10 or 8.1. Basically, after I put it on my number line, I saw that my number is closer to the bigger option, 8.1, so that becomes my rounded answer, 8 1/10. Quick tip, when rounding a number that is not in standard form, make sure you put it in standard form first and then continue. Now let's take a look at the second strategy, midpoint on the number line on our whiteboard. Here we are rounding 6 23/100ths to the nearest tenth. I should underline that too because it's in the tenths place. That's what I'm considering. I draw out my number line. The low end is going to be 6.2 where it stays the same, and the high end is going to be 6.3 if that 2 was raised up one place. Now, my next step is I need to find that midpoint. What is the exact middle between 6.2 and 6.3? So to figure that out, I add in the rest of my digits. 6.21, 6.22, 6.23, 6.24, 6.25, which is my midpoint, 6.26, 6.27, 6.28, 6.29, then 6.3. 6.25 is my midpoint between 6.2 and 6.3. I'm then going to find 6.23 on my number line, and I realize it's closer to 6.2. So 6.2 is my rounded answer. Let's put our new rounding skills to the test with some practice. Round each number to the nearest 100 using both rounding methods for the first 4, then round each to the nearest 10th using both rounding methods. Make sure you're practicing using both because that will really help you be an expert in this skill. Especially if you're answering these on a worksheet, make sure you pause this video, give yourself enough time to answer these questions on your own, and then replay when you're ready to go through them and get the answers. Let's head to the whiteboard to go over those answers. First, we're rounding to the hundreds place. I'm going to underline that 2 because it's in my hundreds place, and I'm looking to that 0, which is next to it. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stays the same down low. 0 is 4 and below, so my final answer is 1,200. Now let's do the same thing, but this time using the midpoint. So I'm drawing my number line. My low end would be 1,200. My high end would be 1,300 because I'm rounding to the nearest hundreds place. My next step is to find a midpoint. So the middle of 1,200 and 1,300 is 1,250. Notice that 5 because there's always going to be a 5 in the middle. Finally, I'm going to take my original number, which is 1,204, and fill it in on my number line. It doesn't have to be exact, just a general idea. And I see that it's closer to 1,200. Note that I got the same answer. For my next one, I'm underlining the 5 in my hundreds place, and I'm looking at that 9. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stay the same down low. 9 is 5 and above, so my 5 becomes a 6, and all numbers to the right become zeros, so my answer is 600. Now let's try it with method 2 on a number line. The low end of my answer would be 500. The high end of my answer would be 600. I now find a midpoint, which is 550. Again, notice that 5 that's in the middle. I then put my number that was originally in my problem on the number line. So in this case, 592 and 800ths is much closer to 600 than it is to 500. So my answer is, again, 600. Next question, we underline that 9. We're looking to the 3. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stays the same down low. So my 3 is obviously 4 and below, so my 9 stays the same. All numbers to the right become 0, so my answer is 2,900. If I do this on my midpoint strategy, I draw my number line. My low end possible answer is 2,900. If I raise that 9 up, it actually pushes up my thousands place, making my high end option being 3,000. My midpoint would be 2,950. Notice that 5. And then I'm putting my original number, 2,934, on my number line. It's closer to 2,900, so 2,900 is my answer. Last one, underline the 7, look to the 5. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stay the same down low. So 5 is obviously 5 and above. It's going to raise up that 7 to an 8. So my answer is 10,800. Numbers to the left stay the same. Numbers to the right get turned into zeros if they're significant. Trying this out with my number line strategy or my midpoint strategy, my low end answer would be 10,700. Even teachers make mistakes. And my high option would be 10,800. I then find the midpoint between these two numbers, which is 10,750. Notice that 5. I then put my original number, 10,751, on the number line, which is just after that midpoint. And therefore, my answer is a little bit closer to 10,800, and that's my rounded answer. Now, let's do this with decimals. Same thing, just don't be intimidated by that tenths. Same process. So for our first one, we have 8 and 92 hundredths. I'm underlining the 9 in my tenths place. I'm looking to the 2, 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stay the same down low. So my 2 is obviously 4 and below. So my 8 and 9 stay the same. So my answer is 8 and 9/10. Now if I do this with my midpoint, this might be a little tricky if you're not as familiar with decimals, but don't be intimidated. Do your best. My low end is 8.9. My high end is 9.0, because if that 9 gets pushed up 1, that 1's place is going to change. My midpoint is 8 and 95/100. Notice the 5, that part doesn't change. I plug in my original number, which is 8.92, which is closer to 8.9. My answers are the same. For my next one, I'm underlining that 9. I'm looking to the other 9. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stay the same down low. So that 9 is clearly 5 and above, so it's going to push that other 9 up. But wait, because of that, all of my other numbers get pushed up. So my final answer here is 20. If I do this on a number line, my low end answer is 19.99 and my high end is 20. It actually should be 19.90. I made a mistake. Even teachers make mistakes. I find the midpoint between these two numbers. In this case, that would be 19.95. Notice that 5, even with decimals, and I plug in my original answer, 19.99. That's much closer to 20, so my rounded answer again is 20. 5.55, I look to the right. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stay the same down low. So my 5 is 5 and above, so it turns that 5 into a 6. Actually, that's totally wrong. It should be 5.6. Man, I'm making mistakes on this whiteboard. See, it's okay to make mistakes, as long as you learn from them. So my rounded answer is 5.6. Now let's do this on our number line. Our low end is 5.5. Our high end is 5.6. Our midpoint is 5.55. Notice how this time our number is actually exactly the midpoint between these two numbers. What do? In this case, we round it up to the higher number because we always round up when it's exactly in the middle. For this last one, underline the 4, look to the 6. 5 and above, raise it up. 4 and below, stay the same down low. 6 is 5 and above, so it's going to push up that 4 to a 5. So our answer is 6 and 5/10. Now let's do this last problem on our number line. Our low end would be 6.4. Our high end would be 6.5. Our midpoint would be 6.45. Notice the midpoint has a 5. Then I'm going to add in my original number, which is 6.46, which is slightly closer to 6.5, so my answer is rounded. Notice how with each of these, the answers are the same, no matter which method you use, which is why it's really helpful to learn both methods so that you have both of these in your toolbox and can double check.
Yeah.
Now it's time for an activity. We're going to be rounding to the nearest whole using midpoint. So even if you prefer the strategy 5 and above, 4 and below, we're going to be practicing with midpoint again to develop that number sense. So for this activity, you're going to need small candies such as M&Ms or Skittles. You can also use plastic manipulatives, which is a fancy word for some plastic chips. You can also use some rocks you found outside, some pennies, just something small that you can move around. Especially if you're at home, be creative. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at the number on the board represented in various forms. So it's going to be in standard, written, modeled, and your job is to take that number and round it to the nearest whole. Step 2, the midpoint is already identified for you. Try to put your candy or plastic chip where the number would lie on that number line. Ask yourself, are you closer to 2 or 1? So your answer is either going to be 2 or 1. Step 3, you can eat your candy if you're using candy if you got the answer correct. If you got it wrong, save it for next time. If you're using rocks, obviously do not eat the rocks. That would be kind of terrible.
Hey!
Give yourself a pat on the scapula. Let's begin. for joining me, awesome teachers and students, for this lesson today. If you are a teacher or parent and would like to purchase the accompanying worksheet that goes with this lesson, be sure to visit my Teachers Pay Teachers page. Link is in the description. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel to help support this free education. And also, if you are willing and able, support me on Patreon. Link is in the description. Have an awesome day. Don't forget, you are awesome.